This happened around 2015, when I was alone at my upstairs apartment with my normally very calm, quiet, older cattle dog. I was sitting on the couch against the wall with the front door to my immediate left, on the same wall that the couch was up against, so I could look to my left and the doorknob was an arm's length away in clear view. I was scrolling on my phone through creepypastas and urban legends, trying to find a good story that would really give me the chills. My dog was sleeping soundly at my feet. For the life of me, I can't re-find the story I'd then come across when a chill ran down my spine. I heard something and looked over to see the doorknob rattling hard. I jumped up so fast, startled, but thinking it was an earthquake, and looked around to notice nothing else was shaking. Still trying to process what was happening, I saw my dog standing in front of the door, hair on his back standing straight up, tail poofed out, teeth bared, growling at the door. I had never seen him act like that before, but his face looked confused. The doorknob continued to rattle loudly, not like someone was turning it from the outside, but shaking fast and hard. I could physically see it shaking from a few feet away. It seemed to last minutes, but I'm sure the whole thing happened within 30 seconds. Being freaked out quickly and without thinking, I closed the story on my phone, and the rattling stopped. My dog and I looked at each other and exchanged confused glances. I stood there for a minute with my dog at my side and told myself I was overreacting and just jumpy because I'd been reading all those scary stories. I took a deep breath and said, "Hello?" No answer. I felt silly. Maybe my now ex was home early and just trying to get inside in a hurry or something. I reached for the doorknob, unlocked it, and opened the door. As the door opened, I took a step outside and leaned halfway out, looking around. Nothing. The stairs to downstairs were empty, and there was just the wall to my right with no one in sight. To this day, I don't know what caused the rattling. That day, I opted out of my scary story search and instead curled up on the couch with my dog and binge-watched episodes of Friends for the rest of the evening. I never had any more experiences in that apartment after that. There is an abandoned house between my town and the town next to me on one of the country roads that connects us. I've been to it before, and even went inside twice with my sister and my best friend. It's an old house that dates back centuries, according to the bank records that I was able to find, and you can just tell by the design. The house is 2 stories with a basement, and lots of furniture and objects strewn about inside, and is far from empty. You can tell that it has been lived in for decades, and whoever had previously owned it, it almost seemed like they just disappeared one day, leaving everything behind. The way I was able to get in before was through the cellar door in the basement, which is broken open and propped up with some big sticks. My first visits were around 2 years ago, and I hadn't gone back at all in that time. Another friend had expressed interest in seeing the house when I told him about my experience, and so, last summer, I told him I'd take him to it. I never thought it was a dangerous trip, and told him that it's just an interesting place to explore. We parked across the street from the house, in the parking lot of one of the industrial buildings nearby. The road was a rural road, but it was far from unused, and we didn't want to be questioned by anyone. My friend, being braver than me despite my previous visits, led the way across the street and to the front of the house. He asked me a couple of questions about it, and what stuff I found in there. I told him that the kitchen still had expired food in it, and that upstairs had a board game set that I ended up bringing home with me. As we walked from the front of the house to the side leading to the back with the cellar, I made note that there was a lot more brush than when I had went last time. I had gone in the spring when I had gone with my sister and best friend, and I never experienced the thick brush that I was now carefully moving through. I made a comment to my friend that there was a lot more foliage than when I'd gone before, as we'd both try to figure out a path to the cellar. Eventually we pushed through some branches and found the cellar, broken and propped open, just as I had last seen it. We talked for a second about being nervous, and I really took in the view of the cellar that led into this dark, abandoned house. I remember being really intimidated while looking at the opening, and I made note that some of the sticks propping open the cellar didn't look familiar to me. I didn't state it out loud, however, as I thought it was just my anxiety. My friend and I discussed who should go in first, and he said since I'm the expert, I should head in first. I was hesitant, but eventually after a good 5 minutes of breathing and calming myself down, I started down the few steps of the cellar. It was an awkward entrance, as half the cellar was collapsed and left little room for maneuvering. You had to duck under the part of the cellar door that was still put together, then inch your feet down the steps, and finally turn your body sideways to fit through the small gap into the basement. I took a long time after ducking under the door since my nerves came back for a second. I made it in fine, and my friend followed very quickly, which I appreciated. We both stood in the corner of the basement now, taking it in. I turned my phone's flashlight on, and he did too. There was a spider web in the path to the stairs up to the first floor. I looked around and found some sort of tool to knock the spider web down, and I think the tool had swiped through the web. After that, I tossed the tool onto the concrete floor. My friend and I talked quietly. I don't remember what about, but afterwards we fell silent for a second. Above us, I clearly heard footsteps on the boards. It almost seemed like they were heading to the stairs that led down to the basement. I remember this part the best, as I looked at my friend and he didn't seem to react to the footsteps I was hearing. I looked at him, suddenly very worried, and before I could even say anything, he said, "We need to go." He turned around and practically jumped up the stairs. I remember thinking he got out insanely fast. I could see him turn and reach his hand back to help me up. I was a bit slower, but I also quickly stepped up the stairs and he pulled me through the opening. I landed on my hands and knees after I escaped the cellar, and I immediately stood up facing the weeds. I turned around to my friend who was crouched, staring down into the cellar, and said to him that we should get out of here. He turned away and told me to first go through the weeds. I pretty much just ran through the brush, definitely getting cut up by something, but we made it through them and back in front of the house very quickly. My friend kept urging me to go in front of him, and he watched behind us before switching to flashing his light in the windows on the first floor of the front of the house. I asked him what he was doing and if he was okay. He didn't really answer me at first, so I asked him if he heard the footsteps before we bolted out of the basement. He turned to me and said that he heard them, and that's why he was watching the cellar, to see if anyone was following us out. He continued saying that after he pulled me up, he turned to guide me away before he let go of my hand, and when he turned back, he saw the bare feet of someone standing at the bottom of the cellar. Because of the cellar's dilapidated structure, he could only see their feet and a part of their legs. At that point, that's when he told me to go through the weeds first. He never saw them come up the cellar stairs or move away from them before he followed me. I didn't believe him at first, and thought he was just trying to scare me, but I could tell by the serious tone of his voice and the silent look he gave me after telling me that he wasn't trying to make me laugh or lighten the mood. I still asked if he was lying, and he aggressively said that he wasn't. He told me that I heard the footsteps already, so I knew something had to be in that house. We stood there for a second, not really saying anything, before we both then agreed to go back across the street towards our cars. We stood by our cars for a while, watching the house to see if anything or anyone would come out, but nothing appeared. After talking for a bit how crazy that was, and him reassuring me that he was telling the truth, it started to rain, and we decided to call it a night. I fully believe him, and he's always stood by what he saw. I haven't gone back to that house since, and I like to tell myself that whoever was in that house was just a homeless person finding shelter. I still get shivers to this day, however, thinking about how close that person was to me as I scrambled up the cellar. I used to live in a small town in rural Canada. There was this old folks' home for the mentally unwell that was closed a long time before I moved there. During the day, people would go on the property and hang out in the well-kept grass and trees. The town still took care of the surrounding grounds for this specific reason. The actual building was locked up, but teenagers would break into the building to basically scare themselves, myself included on a few occasions. Usually with 5 or so people, a little drunk or a bit high, but even stone cold sober. It was lots of fun, probably due to feeling somewhat safe in numbers, and literally nothing actually happened that couldn't be easily explained with logic. Noises, papers shifting. Inevitably, the large group of teens that we were would make too much noise and the cops would get called. One night, me and my best friend, who's a serious skeptic, decided to break into the part of the building we knew hadn't been gotten into by anyone. This time, just the 2 of us, because the more people you bring, the more likely the police are to show up due to a disturbance being called in by someone living across from the property. We've had to book it from the cops before, but we didn't want to tonight, especially if we were going to a place that no one had been before, where we didn't know the exits. To get an idea of what it looks like, 5 stories tall with the 4th and 5th stories making a slight tower jutting out from the middle. Old brick in the front, modern cement blocks that were painted over at the back, where you could tell stuff was added in years later. The newer parts of the building had been broken into by kids, but the main building had thick metal doors and windows that might be able to be opened were we on the 3rd story. It looked like an old school /church/asylum all got cobbled together. There were other little structures around the main building, a pool house, gymnasium, all ransacked by us idiot kids. Not the main floor of the old building though. We climbed on the roof of the boiler room at the back of the building by piling up furniture debris we found in one of the ransacked storage buildings behind the main one. We pulled off one of the plywood covers nailed over a hole in the roof that led into the boiler room and used the pipes along the ceiling and walls to climb down. This part of the building still looked semi-modern, and you could tell was added closer to when it was closed. There was an exit that only opened from the inside, so at least leaving would be easy if needed. Me and my buddy were pumped at this point. The pipes made it easy to get down and everything was going as good as it could. We made our way to the back of the room and found the door leading to the untouched main floor of the building. We were half expecting the door to be locked like all other metal ones, but I opened it with an achy creak. The door opened to the middle of a hallway leading left and right. The first thing we noticed, however, was dust. It was everywhere. It made a 1/4-inch film on everything. We both took a right as it led to an interesting looking main area with sheet-covered furniture. We used our phone screens as lights and took a couple of steps into the main room, and it hit me like a train. I'll try my best to phrase this understandably. All of a sudden, I felt sick. Not throw up sick, but I'm gonna die sick. Like my brain said run, leave, escape, now. I started shaking for no reason. It was so jarring. If I had to compare it to something, it felt like someone was right behind me with the intent to end me. It was weird because of how sudden it was, like a switch went off. I was excited and positive right up until the point where I was convinced we were about to get jumped or murdered. I looked at my buddy, and his face had the same expression of what I felt. Genuinely terrified. White as a ghost. I think that might have scared me even more because I've never seen him like that. Now remember, neither of us saw anything at this point. No ghosts, no distinct noises after the door creak, no creepy dolls or skeletons. Just thick dust and sheet-covered furniture. It made no sense that I felt so threatened, and looking at my friend, I knew he felt it too. Without saying a word to each other, we turned on our heels and walked to the boiler room. We didn't tell each other that either of us wanted to go. We just started backtracking faster than we came in. I was leading us at this point, and my blood ran ice cold when I noticed something on the other side of the door that we left open. A set of fresh-looking footprints, that led down the left route of the hall. We both went right to get to the large main room. The prints were definitely not ours. As we got closer, it got worse. Those footprints started 8 to 10 feet from the door, in the middle of the hall. It looked like a person teleported 10 feet from the door mid-stride and walked in the opposite way around the corner. We booked out of there as fast as possible. Thank God there was an exit in the boiler room, because I can't imagine climbing up those pipes in that panic. I literally never went back to that building. I asked my buddy what he saw on the way back to his house, and he said he saw the prints and noticed how far they were from the door. So I know I wasn't seeing things. Hey guys, thanks for listening. If you want to hear more scary stories, please subscribe and I'll keep them coming. Until next time.